All right, welcome to Showup Shop number 2. Today, I'm going to try and shoot for around 30 minutes, and we'll see how we go. And I feel like today is a perfect example for why I started this in the first place, because I've been a little low energy since my booster shot, and so haven't really felt like doing this, but again, it's kind of the point of the whole project. So here we are. And another thing that I'd like to do today is just kind of start small and build off of it. So if you watched my last video, I was kind of all over the place, and that's totally fine. It meant that, at least for my purposes, I had a lot of cleaning up to do when I wanted to go back and, make things fit according to my own personal aesthetic preferences. So, again, there's no real right or wrong way of doing it, but, we have our own ways of navigating the creative process for the to see what brings us enjoyment. And so, just going to start and stay kind of small today, and we can build off of that later. But that way it'll keep things sort of more focused, and I think it'll encourage / make it easier for me to go back and engage with whatever I get started with today here. But beyond that, I don't really have any major goals. As I said before, the name of this project is Showup Shop because really the point is showing up. So I've been wanting to shoot for about 1 video per week, and we'll see how we go with that. But I was actually pleased with how the last one came out. So I called the result of what I started on the last Showup Shop breaking through, because I thought that it literally looked like some kind of object breaking through, like some glass or something, and you can go back and look at that. But also, I thought that for myself personally, there was maybe not, a breakthrough in any kind of explosive, life-changing way, but just another example for myself of how dedicating that time and intention into something can kind of create a product in and of itself that, to me was at least interesting and satisfying. So it's a good reminder for myself, because I find sometimes it's easy to get caught up in thinking about starting things and having lots of ideas, and then just not pulling the trigger on it because, I'm imagining whatever roadblocks I anticipate will occur. But it is kind of ironic because by allowing those imaginary roadblocks to hamper the creative process, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, just taking this opportunity today to take a leap of faith, so to speak, and do something without having any real even energy for it. But it is something that I enjoy. It is a meditative process. It can be very relaxing as well. And so sometimes it's, I'll compare it to, for example, stretching. I always feel refreshed and like I've benefited when I actually sit down and give myself the time to sort of stretch my muscles out. But actually getting the energy to do that or to start on that can be really tough. So I forget what the term is. Somebody can let me know, but not right now, boy cat. That's my cat begging to go outside. He was happily napping right up until I started to record this. And I would love if he wanted to sit on my lap, but he's pretty squirmy, so anything can bump this camera because my setup is very shaky right now. But I will let him out and give him a couple treats after the video. Another thing is, especially last couple days, and this might correspond with my booster, but you know how life is. I've been feeling some levels of anxiety that are not always usual for me. So, not really sure if there's a specific source or if it's just one of those things where, the body goes in cycles and any number of factors can lead to, a sort of state of being like that. So, rather than getting caught up in wondering, how or why I'm feeling this way, how this feeling came to be, I'm just going to take this time to make an intentional effort to do something that I suspect will help. Just the fact that I'm sitting and putting pen to paper, for me, can be a very relaxing process. And it does feel nice to have an ongoing project of sorts that I can build off of. And, I have the name of this account, and I've now sort of standardized a couple other accounts. So, it's nice to have something to kind of build off of over time, and we'll see where it leads. And that also goes for the doodle here, so yeah. Also not sure if the lighting is going to be improved today or not. I have the lamp sort of facing the wall, so I'm hoping that creates more of an ambient lighting rather than a direct lighting. I noticed there was some kind of artifact from my previous recording, and it wasn't noticeable on live, to me at least. But I made a time lapse. I condensed the 56 minutes into about 28 seconds. I think I just multiplied it by or sped it up by, what would it be, 12,000% or something. Just trying to be able to create little 30-second clips of whatever I come up with during these sessions. But it is kind of blowing my mind, because I'm looking at my little stopwatch right now, and it's telling me that I've been doing this for 10 minutes, and it doesn't feel like it. So, to me, that's a good sign. So I'm going to shoot for 30 minutes because it's nice to start with small goals. But if I decide to go longer, so be it. I've talked before about little preferences I have, little guidelines, but it's not like a formalized process. So I wasn't really sure if today I wanted to kind of work off of a more simple set of patterns, or even potentially just do like a repeating pattern with small variations. Still think I'd like to do a video like that, but hey, this is just sort of spontaneously coming out of this little Pilot G2. So, yeah, just going with it at this point. I like it at this stage. The main thing was that I wanted to start more central and then kind of work outwards, and that way I can always go back and add more detail. But sometimes I find just having a lot of space around the object to frame it can have a really nice effect, in my opinion. But just to sort of like consciously verbalize part of the process here, I tend to like to close lines. I'm not sure if that's the term. I should probably check with somebody more formally trained in the arts. But for example, this line here, I like to be able to enclose it so that it gives a sense of like, I guess you could say two-dimensionality, but with an impression perhaps of even three-dimensionality to it. And I think I'd like to break out of that a little bit. So I might be experimenting, if not today, then during another session, on just allowing myself to leave those lines sort of disconnected. There's definitely a lot of cool effects that you can produce. And also I want to do something more freeform in general. A lot of my posts recently on Instagram, you'll see that I have, I kind of embrace this style that I'm talking about, where I like to close the lines. But there's a few pieces that I do have up that are more scribbly, if you will. And I like the effects that those can produce too. So there's definitely something to be said for having a like recurring style of sorts. And just because I keep noticing I'm smudging over here, I'm going to do a little magic trick. Flip it upside down. But yeah, I'd still like to be able to branch out just for my own interest and enjoyment. But I also just like doing things that feel natural and good to my aesthetic sensibilities. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. From the last piece I was working on, I found creating little like checker patterns at a nice effect of sort of defining the edges of the object that I was trying to sort of emphasize or draw out. But at the same time, it was something that I could do fairly automatically. And that's something that can make this process very relaxing as well. So I don't know if I'm going to fill these in with checker patterns, but at the very least I'm enjoying just sort of adding detail into some of these enclosed spaces. Another thing I find is sometimes when I place a lot of detail into small spaces like this, it can kind of build value. And I actually don't mean that from, I think, the more artistic sense of the word, where they talk about, like, my wife could clarify more, building up the value of, like, your painting or whatever. But in this case, I mean it more in the sense of, like, worth. Because I find that if I have spent a lot of time in a small surface area, then a word that pops into my head is that it elevates the shape that I'm, putting that time and intention into, because it gives it the impression of a lot of intentionality or even forethought and planning, which it doesn't necessarily have going into it. So really, I think, sometimes it's hard to judge how much time went into any one thing, but I think at the very least, putting a lot of time and intention into a finite area can give the impression that there was a lot of, like, decision making that led to that object being created. And I like that impression, especially because a lot of time there's no initial inspiration or idea that I want to start working from. So like today, I just hit live and put pen to paper. But I also, I would like to explore more intentional sort of forethought and planning. Just not too much, because for me, it can really put a damper on the process of just getting stuff out there. So, but I like the effect this is having so far. Uh-oh. If you saw the shake there, that would be Boy Cat, and you may see his paws walking across the the canvas. So I'm just going to let him pass along. Go on. There you go. Alrighty. Not a problem. Day in the life. I like that. Looks kind of like hands. So I think last time on live I mentioned some brief explanation of the lines that I currently have in my Instagram bio. And so one of those, or I guess two of those lines that I have say implicitly familiar, explicitly alien. And the meaning behind that is the fact that, like I say, this part over here kind of looks like a hand, but it's not. There's really nothing you could point to say definitively it is a hand, or the artist was trying to create the impression of a hand. And so I like leaving things sort of ambiguous and in the eye of the beholder. So, and then, so implicitly familiar, but explicitly alien. So, explicitly just looking at this, it looks like a mishmash of just sort of geometric objects all together. And yet there definitely seems to be some kind of intelligent design, so to speak. Looking at this, it seems as if there's some process that has brought it together, maybe according to certain rule sets. And there very well may be. I mean, obviously it's coming from my brain, so yeah, there's the biological process. But on the level of consciousness and, those sorts of decision-making aspects of our experience, I don't really see any particular pattern that leads me to create this object in this shape. It's just sort of led by instinct, I guess you could say. And sometimes what I will do is I'll try and break things up just for variety's sake. So like if I notice I'm getting stuck in a rut of sorts of repeating the same pattern or motif, but it's not as sort of naturally rewarding as what I'm looking to get out of this. That's what I would consider for myself to be a sort of rut. But that can be part of the process as well. Like, I have intentionally worked through some of those feelings, especially with regards to like inking in some of these spaces. So it can take a certain level of dedication to actually follow through. That's why I've experimented actually recently with just using like a paint fill tool. And I think there's value to all of these processes, really. So like a paint fill tool obviously can produce a very strong effect with ease. But kind of depends on what you're going for and what you want to get out of it, because sometimes the process of art making is about the process itself. And so I've included that in some of my bios as well. I think on my YouTube channel, which you can find via the Linktree link in the Instagram bio, says something like, it's about the process, not the product. So that's more of a reminder to me, because I don't want to get so caught up in producing content for whatever reason, that I kind of lose sight of the actual process itself. So, yeah, I mean, this is ultimately a project that is here to serve me, and I hope that it can bring some enjoyment to others, and somebody else might find it interesting. But I'm just going to be doing it anyway, so yeah, we'll see how it goes. Oop, here he comes. He might be looking for a way back to the table. I haven't been paying attention to the framing, so it looks like I've gone out of frame a little bit here. But that's okay. Who needs everything to be framed up perfectly? I think it'll make probably for a more interesting time lapse if I'm constantly rotating. Which I do often. Because this shape is completely arbitrary, there's really no correct orientation beyond whatever I find most aesthetically pleasing. So often what I'll do is start in one orientation and then just sort of continue to kind of rotate it and see if there's any shapes that I can see in it. Because for me, part of the process is self-discovery and figuring out what is inside here being my brain. Do these have independent lives of their own? Oh, expect some camera shake. Here he is again. Here, you might see his paws. Okay, buddy. Good job. There you go. Let's get down on the floor. Thank you. I think also my my camera may have gone a little lower. I have a very, very, very shaky setup. So I think I might be losing some vertical height here, which is not ideal, especially given that I'm live currently. But you know what? We're going to roll with it. So let me do this. Oh, that's looking better already. Okay. Now I just got to plug the phone back in for battery. And that should do it. Good. Framing, lighting already seems much better. Awesome. So from here, got a very distinct sort of concentration of shapes and patterns going on. And I think I actually want to keep that. I don't think I want to expand much beyond the borders that I've already created or the impressions of borders. It's kind of like real life because, borders are made up. Doesn't mean they don't matter, but, likewise, these are all just very arbitrary delineations. So another thought that I'm having is something interesting that happens. Earlier, I was talking about elevating the piece, and what I mean by that is when you take something that has arbitrary significance and then you put a lot of time and attention into it, it will take on a sort of life of its own, at least for me on an emotional level, because suddenly something that I had no attachment or care for will, just by the nature of the fact that I've put real time and intention and ink and paper into it, that creates value basically out of thin air. And I find that process really fascinating, because I think that it's so analogous and applicable to other parts of our lives. And yet I find that it's an impulse that is worth questioning and pushing against, because that newfound or newly created sense of value that comes out of putting a lot of time and attention into something like this, and energy, let's just put it simply, because I was talking about my lower energy levels after the booster shot. You put energy into something and you want to see returns. And there's a impulse that is saying, be very careful now. So at the beginning, it was just put pen to paper. And then there's an impulse that crops up after a certain point. There's like a chemical terminology in chemistry when it's not boiling point, but it's when you reach a certain sort of critical phase, and a chemical will transition from one phase to another. I'm probably mishmashing the technical terminology, but if anybody knows what I'm talking about, then that's kind of what I'm getting at here, is the idea that your piece can go from having no value to suddenly being something that you don't want to destroy. And yeah, I find that kind of fascinating. And also it begs the question, like, what do you mean destroy? Can any choice I make here destroy the piece? Well, from the perspective of my own preferences, yes. There's certain decisions that I could make that would produce an effect that I find not nearly as satisfying as other effects. So from that perspective, yes. But I think there also is something to be said for taking risks in the approach to art making that can produce effects that you never could have anticipated if you had stayed within your comfort level. So I'm just going to kind of self-admit now that that's what I'm doing today, really, is staying within a certain comfort level. I think that's okay for this one today. But it's just about what you want to get out of it. What do you think? Is this the ideal orientation? So I'd said earlier that I wanted to kind of stay within the borders that I'd already established, but hey, you go where the wind takes you. So kind of like what's going on here. So part of this process or project, whatever you want to call it, is, as I mentioned, kind of about self-discovery, because I don't really have an interest in formalizing my decision-making process when it comes to art making. But at the same time, I do find it interesting to give myself the opportunity to vocalize some of that process as it suits me. And sometimes just sort of like bringing awareness to your default mode of operation can help to create opportunity for change, if so desired. The nice thing about trying to limit these to 30 minutes is, at least where I am currently, I can definitely afford 30 minutes here or there in between things. So it keeps it as sort of like a low barrier to entry. But it also gives me opportunity to go beyond that if I'm feeling it, which I am. I think we're at about 37 minutes right now, which is pretty good. So, if anybody saw the previous piece that was a result of what I started on Showup Shop number 1, that one, I didn't time myself. I might start timing myself just for kind of like record keeping, but I estimate it probably took at least 3 to 4 hours to do that one. And that's good for me to know, just for my personal reference. It also, I think I benefit when I see artists post how long it took them to work on something, 15, 20 hours. Kind of blows my mind. I often have never had the patience and persistence to work continually on a piece for nearly that long. So that's another really powerful tool in the process, is just to just keep working at something. Oh, there's the boy again. There's his paws. Thank you. Okay. I will take you outside after the art video. Okay? Thank you. Yeah, I'll just adjust the lighting a little bit. So yeah, the framing is not ideal. I would probably like to have a better setup in the future, but that's okay. So, it's a pretty good start. Not sure what direction I want to take it at this point. Sometimes what I like doing is actually fully enclosing whatever kind of shape that I'm working with. And, yeah, again, this is one of those things where it's like, do I want to challenge that impulse for today? Or do I want to embrace it just for the sake of flow? Because I am finding at this stage that my decision-making process is getting a little bit bogged down. So I think I'm just going to kind of default to what I know and enjoy at this juncture. And in the future, we can make a more intentional effort to branch out But you know, again, going back to the reminder for myself that this is really just more about the process of doing it. So yeah, there's no judgment if I decide to do what is comfortable and natural to me. And what that seems to be at this point is trying to unite all these little independently floating shapes. Yeah, so I like the effect it produces to have them disembodied or floating, but I think I'm going to just connect them up anyway. I've got so much of that going on elsewhere in this one that I think it creates a central kind of theme, and that also produces what to me is a satisfying effect. So I think just based on the goal of enclosing all these items, you know, some of these things in the center might be kind of free floating, but sometimes I take inspiration from like cellular biology, and while I'm no expert on it by any means, I do like the fact that, you know, you have the cell wall that sort of separates the inner from the outer, and then you have the, you know, free floating organelles and such that don't look explicitly connected necessarily, but they are connected just by, I guess, the fluids inside the cell and whatever little free floating micro machines exist to transport chemical nutrients in between the various functions. So, but if you're a biologist, then I apologize. So definitely these big blank spaces are sort of calling out to me to put something there. But also, I really like the effect that they can have just to remain empty. So I might leave them as is. And honestly, some of what I'm doing right now is just sort of like overlaying a little bit of visuals in my mind to see if there's any direction that I want to take it. How about another flippy flip? See how that does it. Okay. I like what that does to the overall shape of it. Now, I guess the question is, do I go ahead and fill in similar things for the rest of these little gaps? They're almost begging for it. Yeah. But I think I'm just going to kind of go and do a few different styles in each of these spaces. One thing I really love to hear in terms of feedback is what people think the things that I draw look like, because ultimately there's really no right answer, which means there's no wrong answer either. So it's just fun for me. It's kind of like a collaborative effect, you know, that I create something and then it acts as a sort of look into the person's brain to see like what kind of associations they have with these arbitrary shapes that I've created. And yeah, that's super fun. One thing I like to do is when I establish a line, I kind of like to avoid confusing its shape with too many other lines around it, because I don't know, I just like how these two shapes, while they look, you know, initially quite disconnected, they highlight one another, and they also play off of one another, because if I hadn't started by creating these long shapes here, then I wouldn't have had the idea to fill in the space in between them. So it's just really fun to see how these things come about. I think maybe one more big one here. feel like I'm kind of building Lego or something, and I'm like filling in little bits of like scaffolding or support structures just to like connect everything together. That's just a personal preference. Not a bad start. I feel like this area over here really is just crying out for some special attention, so I might just take a second to look at it and see if it's telling me anything. Bubbly. This is where I like to give the impression of dimensionality, so there's really nothing that demands or like explicitly tells you that this object has any kind of dimensionality beyond the two dimensions of the paper, but I sort of imply things here, as it looks like there's illusory continuity between this little drippy looking hanging piece of phlegm or whatever you want to call it, deflated animal balloon or something. But because I've created this shape elsewhere, I think what it does is it makes an impression in the mind of, again, what I call illusory continuity, and then the brain says, oh, well, anywhere else that I see that pattern, it's probably going to resemble the others as well. And so even though there's really a break in the pattern, the brain interprets it as just sort of a continuation. And I think that's pretty cool too. Now they look kind of like olives. Okie doke. Well, I think that's a great start for today. If I can even go so far as to say I like what we have even better than the first video, just as a starting point. So stay tuned. I'll be working on this one a little bit more, and then I will post an update on my Instagram with the finished product whenever I get around to it. So yeah, stay tuned. Thanks for joining.